context of Tom's speech. First, the war in Syria is functionally over. Assad controls upwards of 90% of ground territory, all major ports, all major cities, all major trade routes. Second piece of context, Israeli airstrikes on joint Russian and Iranian operations are the only holdout to an Assad-controlled Syria, one that can begin to trade with Russia, again, one that can allow developments in the Middle East again. This is about Russia's interests in the round. Russia's interests are as follows. What is the model? We're going to strike reprisally and reciprocally. That is, we're going to do exactly the same thing to Israel that they've been doing to Russia, Iran, and to Hezbollah targets. That is, we're going to target specifically military installations along their border, military installations that they're setting up in incursion areas in Syria. This looks like airfields, it looks like artillery bases, it looks like train bases. This debate, this is the frame of view as a panel, should be not adjudicated on what is best for the world or net, very specifically what is best for Russia, and within that what is best for the Russian authorities. That is the Kremlin, that is Putin. I'm going to read you three arguments to that. First, why Russia and the Kremlin have a principal obligation to protect Russian and Iranian citizens. Second of all, how this stops Israeli airstrikes and how that's great for regional stability. And third, how this bolsters Putin's flagging popularity within Russia. First, on the principle. In this argument, I want to do a bit of characterization as to what exactly the Russian presence on the ground looks like. Because yes, they operate largely separate to Iranian and Hezbollah forces, but they often take place in forms of joint exercises. What does this look like? It looks like training for the Syrian National Guard for the Iranian forces. It looks like joint air bases, so they can just fly and refuel planes together. It looks like joint artillery operations. What that means is that there is a massive number of Russian troops stationed alongside and contemporary with Iranian troops. This argument is very simple. An attack on these Iranian or Hezbollah bases and operations directly threatens the lives of Russian military personnel on the ground. We think a state's primary obligation in an active conflict zone should be to protect its own soldiers above and beyond anything else. As Russia, you have a principal obligation to protect the lives of these soldiers and protect their security. Second of all, why does this stop Israeli strikes? We tell you this is a mechanism you do not actually have to use. The threat of these strikes alone will suffice. Why is this? First, Israel is a nation that is very, very concerned with their defense. It is literally a population founded on an act of self-defense. The examples of the 1948-49 war, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, Intifadas 1, 2, and 3. The absolute last thing an Israeli population wants is an increase in their security threat, specifically towards the IDF. Second of all, Russia is known very publicly in Israel to be super effective in the region, specifically with regards to their airstrikes. How do we know that this is true? It is the Russian airstrikes that have primarily won the war for Assad. That is, Russian targeting specifically of rebel bases is something that has turned the tide in Assad's favor. There is no reason Israel has to believe these strikes won't be similarly effective, specifically because we're targeting things that are not necessarily within the Israeli Iron Dome defense system. We're targeting military bases, we're targeting their installations in Syria. Third, Israeli election results will swing as a result of this policy. One of the key reasons Netanyahu is losing popularity and is thought perhaps to be about to lose the next election is because he's perceived as being overly aggressive, specifically with regards to Israeli engagement with Palestine, and most Israelis are trending towards not supporting that sort of behavior. If there is a threat to Israeli soil, it is brought about directly by Netanyahu's orders. That is airstrikes that he personally, from his executive office, has ordered. That massively empowers Benny Gantz, who is currently about 45 to 50% polling popularity ratio, to take over and to therefore adopt a much, much less aggressive Israeli policy in the region. That means that these Israeli airstrikes will likely stop now, either immediately or as a result of the next election. Why is that great for Russia? We tell you this improves regional stability, specifically by handing regional hegemony over to the Russians. The context for this in Syria is that Great Britain, France, and the US are all withdrawing en masse from the Syrian region. Israel is almost literally the only military holdout that is backing the rebels in a sincere fashion in this context by striking Iranian and Hezbollah forces. What does that mean? It means that if the Israeli threat is neutralized, all of the economic reasons, which are about 50% of the reason that Russia got involved in the Syrian crisis in the first place, start to flow through. Things like access to Syrian oil reserves on the cheap, things like access to their mineral deposits and their massive mining reserves. Third, it means things like trade, not just with Syria, but within the region as a whole, because you improve stability. People aren't afraid of flying planes over Israel and Syria and Lebanon for fear that they get shot down by the rebels, or for fear that they get shot down by Assad. And finally, it just looks great for Russia. Russia is a power that, especially in a post-Cold War context, has been very concerned about its presence on the global stage. Taking control of a region of the world this significant is something that will look awesome for them. Before I move on to my third argument about how this bolsters Putin's popularity, I'll tell you who I've closed.
This debate isn't about airstrikes on Russian troops that happen to be close to Iranian or Hezbollah troops. It is about attacks on Iranian or Hezbollah troops because there's not that many Russian troops in Syria.
Wait, okay, first of all, I told you that that's not true. That the way that Russia operates is that they do joint training exercises and they literally train the Syrian and Iranian National Guard. But second of all, even if you don't believe that, you don't have to be attacking Russian troops for all of these impacts to hold. All of the impacts I've given you about regional stability, about the fact that Israel is the only holdout here, and Israel is the only real threat to Syrian power, to Iranian power, to Hezbollah power. All of those impacts operate whether or not it's Russian troops on the ground. Russia is just the actor that's doing the reprisal strikes and making a threat in this context, in a context where Iran or Hezbollah, that is not a state, cannot be meaningfully threaten Israel. So, why does this bolster Putin's popularity? I think this is potentially one of the biggest things around insofar as Russia's self-interest is concerned, because Russia has, in a slightly China-esque fashion, for the best part of a decade, played a game. The game is that the Russian population are happy in some contexts to accept economic downturn if they are provided with a sense of nationalism, with a sense that their country is on the rise in other areas. Currently, we're seeing a significant economic downturn. This, in Russia as a result of sanctioning, this is exactly the sort of strengthening move that is required to bolster Putin's popularity. The way, briefly into an example, and we know that this works, is that the Ukraine intervention, the last piece of significant military action by Russia, bolstered its approval rating by something like 20 percentage points. Why would it bolster? First, Putin looks strong by standing up to Israel. Not only is Israel a proxy for the United States in the region, but it's also a state that has been antagonistic with Russia in the past. And as all of these strikes have spillover harms onto Russian forces, and it looks like their control is being taken away. But second of all, it bolsters its popularity because it reverses the economic downturn. That is when you suddenly have trade in the Middle East, you suddenly get preferential access to Syrian oil reserves, you get preferential access to minerals, you get preferential access to Iranian trade deals because Iran is really happy that you've stopped strikes on their bases. You're much, much more likely to reverse this economic downturn and bolster Putin's popularity. This is about not what is best for the world, specifically what is best for Russia, what is best for the Kremlin, what is best for Putin. Very proud to propose.
All right, I think we can go to Mark, Secretary Leader of Opposition.
basically won the war in Syria, it is not clear why this policy is needed. In the first case, given how much of Syria's infrastructure and economic capacity was obliterated by the war, it's not clear why trading in Syrian minerals is particularly important to Russia right now. But in the second case, it seems like the Assad government can be a reliable partner to Russia on either side of the house. There are a lot of reasons why this is a bad idea, so I'm going to give you a lot of arguments. I'm going to talk about why the status quo isn't that bad for Russia. I'm going to talk about how this hurts Russia's broader interests in the regions. I'm going to talk about this as strategic policy. I'm going to talk about domestic politics. Before that, one red herring, which is this principled obligation to save the lives of their soldiers. Like, they're soldiers for a reason, right? They are there to risk their lives to fulfill your strategic objectives. The idea that you always have an infinite principled obligation to save the lives of your soldiers doesn't make very much sense. Okay, so why is Israel very restrained in these attacks currently? First, because there is some possibility of reciprocity. They say Hezbollah can't threaten Israel because it's not a state, but it has presence in Gaza, and it has a significant presence in the government of Lebanon. Of course it can threaten Israel. Second, because Israel is politically volatile for the reasons they identify. Third, because there are broad consequences for attacking and hurting Russia. Anyway, that is to say, if they are right about this characterization, Israel already knows that there might be some political consequence to killing Russian troops, and that Russia might attack them or might not like it if this happens. And so some deterrence probably already exists. Fourth, Israel is only doing these attacks in a buffer zone near the Israeli border in Syria. That is to say, Israel isn't really interested right now in polarizing the Middle East and trying to support the rebels and oppose Assad. They're interested in ensuring that Hezbollah can't operate near the Israeli border and launch missiles and rockets from that area into Israel. So they are doing these strikes in a limited and careful way near the border, and Russia is able to defend themselves against that. At this point, I think that Assad can stabilize most of Syria. This isn't that bad for Russia. It's not that bad for trading, because it's very unclear why Israel is super invested in supporting whatever is left of the rebels right now, especially if they're losing as far as the Afghan government tells us this. Second, why is this bad for Russia's broad interests in the region? I have like 6 things to say here. The first is on Israeli politics. So they give a bizarre argument here, which is that Netanyahu is unpopular because he's too aggressive. It's the exact opposite, right? Netanyahu is unpopular because he might be indicted for corruption. The thing that he campaigns on to get more popularity is how aggressive and strong he is, which is like, so I think that this idea strengthens the Israeli right, and it strengthens the Israeli right not only because they're perceived as more hawkish and they don't have to rely on the Arabs or Dutch Zionist parties, but second, because specifically the kingmaker party in Israel right now is Avigdor Lieberman's Israel Beitenu, and Israel Beitenu mostly gets its support from Russian-speaking Israelis who fled from Russia, who don't really like the government of Russia. So then you make the kingmaker party have to support Netanyahu, who's being strong against Russia. So Israeli politics get more hostile to Russia. That seems like a bad thing. Israeli politics moves further to the United States, strengthens Netanyahu, makes the region more volatile. All of the reasons they concede would be bad for Russia. Second, other regional actors. Look, Turkey is, for example, supporting the rebels, wants to create a safe zone in northern Syria, wants to have some degree of control of in places like this. Russia would like to sell the S-400 missile defense system to Turkey. Why? Because Turkey is in NATO, and if Russia can move closer to Turkey, it splits apart the NATO alliance and makes it harder for NATO to coherently respond to Russian aggression into Eastern Europe. This is a policy that seems to be overstepping Russia's support, or overstepping the degree of influence Russia wants to have in Syria, which is really going to antagonize Turkey and other regional powers that Russia wants to have a reasonable relationship with, in part to split up the sort of US axis of support. Third, the US is not going to like this. And they might make this sort of lame argument that like, oh, Trump really likes Russia. So, okay, one, he asked Ukraine for dirt on his rivals. Ukraine doesn't like Russia, so it seems like he's okay cooperating with people who don't like Russia. Second, it's an election year. He really wants to prove that he's not beholden to the Russians. Third, he is dependent, particularly now, on the rest of the Republican Party. The rest of the Republican Party has really strong affinities to Israel. So it seems if you make him pick, he's going to pick Israel. That's really bad. More sanctions do concretely hurt Russia. It does concretely hurt the ability of Russia to do things at the UN Security Council. It does concretely hurt Russia's security position. Fourth, I don't think Assad likes this very much, right? Because Assad wants to do what they say. He wants to consolidate control. He doesn't want to be drawn into this massive conflict in a world where Russia potentially attacks Israel, and Syria has to take a side on behalf of the Russians, and then potentially there's all these spillover consequences. The current situation, as they say, is working just fine for Assad. Unclear that this strengthens their relationship with that government. Fifth, it hurts the ability of Russia to be a mediator in the region, which is why they pursue things like the Astana process, because you're taking too much of a side, and you are like hurting the ability of Russia to be seen as a regional player. And just like sixth, I would just say that like it is not particularly clear that having Hezbollah and the IRGC running around in Syria is particularly good for Russia. Rather, letting Assad consolidate control rather than the militia seems to be better. If you can control Assad better, they can control the militias. Can you still have your on? Okay. Third argument, as strategic policy. First, the problem with red lines is that you're not going to cross this red line and everyone knows it. Why? Because you're currently set up mostly for training. However many troops that is, it's not enough to do this. Second, Israel has nukes. Everyone knows they have nukes. Third, the US is involved. So I think everyone knows you're not going to cross this red line. There is some risk of an incident, right? Because they say Israel is defensive, but their conception of defense is a very proactive conception of defense. Maybe there's some miscommunication. Maybe something happens. Maybe a Russian soldier dies. And in that case, you don't cross this red line, and then you lose lots of credibility, right? Which is really important for all the other actors in the region you care about, and the domestic political implications you care about. So this policy doesn't actually add to the deterrence, it just means that you might violate an expectation you create. But if you do attack Israel, that would be terrible. Russia, has about the economy of Belgium. It is concerned militarily in Ukraine. It is unclear they have the ability to do something like this, which would force the US to respond. I think everyone knows that this isn't going to happen, but if it does happen, it would be terrible and destabilizing. Finally, on Putin's popularity. Look, one, already intervening in places like Ukraine, unclear that this is a tipping point. Two, of course economics matter. The worst election results for Putin was when oil prices dropped and people weren't able to make that revenue. Sanctions did make a difference. CF, the recent Moscow election results, when people people aligned to Alexei Navalny got more results. I just don't think that Putin's popularity is particularly bolstered by this. They're already in Syria, they're getting support on that, they're already trading in Syrian minerals or whatever. The most important thing for Russia's popularity is not potentially being seen as destabilized. That is, the bargain of the Russian people is they want Putin because stability. When Putin promulgates this action that might lead to a lot of instability, I think that weakens Putin's hold on the electorate. This is a bad idea for about 17 reasons.
All right, I think this is for those final remarks, and I invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
When OO comes up here and tells you one of the biggest problems in economic dependence and trade within Syria is that the infrastructure is crumbling, when Israel is literally bombing that infrastructure and preventing the ability there to be sustainable economic development, that is the problem that OO only further increases. Three things in this speech. First, I'm going to explain to you why the laundry list that OO tries to give you literally doesn't matter in terms of the most important impacts in this round, which is how you shape Putin and how you shape the ability of Russia to maintain its strength. And then I'm going to give you some new argumentation as to why, particularly as an actor for Russian trade here, finding some framing about what should matter when you're weighing between the types of arguments in this round. Let's start with the laundry list. First thing they tell you is that this idea that your soldiers are not at risk and there's no problem here. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, the info slide literally tells you that Russia is attacking Iranian troops. We know they're not stationed at the border. We know they're stationed internally. We know they're literally attacking Russian forces as well. Yet if the side opposition tries to come up and lie to you and say that this is not a Russian threat, I don't think the only reason that Russia cares is because it's an ally in this region. It wants to give military support and is actively involved. Insofar as this is a threat to your soldiers, it's not this silly principle where it's like the soldiers volunteered to die anyway. If you are a country, you should probably protect the soldiers that are there to fight their fight and not let them die if there's an ability to actively protect them. That is what the principle gives you matters. Now they say there's no problem in the status quo, they're doing this in this buffer zone, etc., etc. Firstly, remember what I just told you, which is that it's already occurring at the border, and not just occurring at the border, it's occurring internally, there are literally forces there. But secondarily as to why, if Israel thinks that there's literally no retaliation in response to this, it can continue to increase the amount of strikes that it does, and continue to fight back the allies that Russia has in the region. This has the potential of spilling over to many other types of regional instabilities, which we think are likely to be important to the state as well. Why is this important? Because insofar as Netanyahu is, especially internally politically, trying to maintain his control, if you make it even more difficult for them to be able to maintain that control, they'll realize that the risks that they're taking are not worth it. The next thing they try to tell you is this political argument that the right is being strengthened in Israel and that is super enforced. A couple of problems here. Firstly, note that the right is already strengthened and is already fighting in this region. They are going to the maximum amount that they can already go by literally striking the area when the conflict should be over. They're taking an active risk when the international community looks down upon this and says, look, this region should be stable, but for some reason Israel continues to strike in a region that we want the conflict to be solved, where Assad can actually create peace and try to moderate himself. Why is this important? Because it means that one, you only create the potentiality of there being a threat to your political ability to maintain yourself, but secondarily, we think it creates an incentive for Russia, who wants to protect its allies, to have to go in and be stronger. Why is this particularly important though? Note that even if they win this argument that the right is strengthened, even if they're already strengthened to the maximum, it literally does nothing, because the important comparison here is who's able to have more military support in the region, which is something that only Putin is able to get. The next thing they tell you is that the US is not going to like this, and they might potentially sanction you. Note just why that this is the only place where they make economic impacts is there might be sanctions. Firstly, the US has already been engaging in these sanctions. There's no reason as to why there's any potentiality for increase. What we actually think, though, is that the comparison is that Trump really supports Russia. The Ukraine thing was about Biden and like Trump's own personal political election. It has nothing to do about whether Trump actually supports Russia. And compare this to his rhetoric in terms of Israel. He's actually been moderating and saying things like, oh, the Israeli government should probably chill about how they treat the Palestinians. Like, maybe take a second look at this. These are tweets that have been widely thought of. Why is this important? Insofar as a political actor, Trump is more likely to side with Russia and has much stronger roots to Russia, and probably part of the reason why he was able to be elected. He's probably likely to be supporting them in this sort of fight, or at the very least, to not step back. So they have to give you stronger linkage as to why this is important after the round. Next thing they tell you is that Russia is an important mediator. They're not a mediator. They're picked aside, they're backing Iran, their allies in Assad, like there's no business where it's going to be able to do that. No thanks. The final thing they tell me is that if you cross the red line, this is going to be a problem, and things could occur. Firstly, we're perfectly happy with that happening. If Israel continues to do these sorts of things, we think it's a meaningful threat to Russian soldiers, and we should act, and we should have an obligation to protect them. And secondarily, it affects your overall economic well-being. If you're not able to access a very important resource for oil, you're not able to access the economic linkages necessary for trade in the region. What are you left with at the end of OO? Know that they've given you no specific linkages as to why Russia as an actor has a primary obligation to care about literally anything they said in the speech. And explain to us why Putin has a specific reason to use this as a way to build nationalism and build support, especially when this is flagging, because aggression by Russia is the thing that voters respond to that is literally what Putin's base comes from. That's important because it means it's the way that Russia is able to strengthen itself. But secondarily, note that none of their economic impacts actually explain why tangibly letting these strikes go on is likely to improve Russia's economic well-being. We're the only ones showing you why you're actually likely to get a change there. Before I go on, I'll take this.
You say that you want Russia to gain economic ties with countries in the Middle East, but at the same time you're launching an airstrike on your main ally and alienating Israel and Saudi Arabia. Why would the Middle East want to trade Russia after it's shown?
No, that's not your main ally. Your main ally is Iran, and you want to be able to trade within Syria. That is where the natural resources are. Don't let them change who your allies are. This is important because the places that you're able to get economic stability and economic dependence come from the things in Ed's speech. Now let's go to Ed's speech. Pretty unfortunate that they didn't respond to most of the substantive reasoning he gave you here because it's really significant. Let's go to the last thing he said, which is about Putin's popularity. This is pretty important. You don't know, in the end of this round, it's probably going to be messy, and you won't know how all the links play out. One thing you know for sure is that just the threat of this directly increases Putin's popularity is the way that he has garnered and invigorated his base in the past, and it is the thing that he gains support for. Insofar as he does things like threatening those who attack his own soldiers and attack his own allies, that's going to increase his support, and that's really good if you're Russia and you're worried about the idea of people resisting you and you're worried about their popularity decreasing. That's really important. That is very tangible impacts in this round. Now let's talk about finally framing as to where this round breaks down. Firstly, note, insofar as your own troops are stationed here and they're literally under threat, we think there's no reason for you to let Israel continue to go on and let them think that it's okay to continue to bomb these areas or to airstrike these areas. We think not saying, even if they say like, oh, the threat of airstrikes might lead to negative impacts later on, we think that doesn't matter because insofar as you're not actively acting and showing that you're willing to show support for your soldiers, you're violating your obligation towards your own military by saying that you don't have active ability and you're willing to use them as a means to an end and let their life be forgotten. What's the next important thing? They have not contested that this is likely to stop Israeli strikes. Russia has already been very, very effective in empowering Assad and literally winning a civil war that people thought that Assad was going to lose. They have particular expertise in the region and know how to airstrike in this area, which means the threat is likely to be followed and they have the effective mechanisms to do so. That's important because it means that if you believe in regional stability and you believe that the region should have access not just to trade with Russia, but just overall regional stability, you have to be voting for us because we're showing you as to why you're actually going to remove the last thing that is preventing meaningful peace in a region that has been threatened by wars for so long. And the final thing is, look, if you are Russia, and the thing that is going to bolster your own political popularity is doing this sort of act, we think it's something that will definitely do that, and so it'll start from you. Very proud of you.
Lebanon, trade, etc. So I think a lot of the arguments they give you costs or even the risk of costs which we think are unnecessary. With that said, first issue to make is what happens in our world long term and why would you actually get some sort of resolution, right? Because it's not the case that if you don't draw this line in the sand that things will actually escalate, because we're pretty clear on what Israel's goals were and they don't contest this. The only response we get to this is just, well, sometimes they attack Iranian troops and sometimes they might bomb infrastructure. True, but those are orthogonal to stand these arguments about what the ultimate end state of Israel's goal is, right? Israel's specifically trying to create a buffer region, hence the reasons why they target a specific pattern. They're not trying to relitigate the conflict, so it's unclear that what they're doing will actually destabilize the region. Second of all, look at the status quo, right? Israel has been repeatedly doing this, and yet Assad has continued to consolidate power, as they themselves tell you in the overview of UNC, right? Given that, it seems pretty clear that Israel's repeated bookings periodically are just for domestic political reasons, perhaps to get some sort of sense of safety, but they don't actually threaten the ability of Assad and Russia to consolidate power in that region long term. So on our side of the house, you still get the same best possible end state where Russia doesn't have to hold Assad's hand indefinitely, where Assad does regain control, and where infrastructure in Syria does redevelop and the region is stabilized in the long run. Anyways, second of all, in terms of what Israel's perspective is, why they actually really threaten this balance, right? Because we explained to you that true, yes, Israel perhaps is hawkish sometimes, but they're also simultaneously really risk averse, right? This is the reason why they are already aware of all the threats they talk about. Given that Israel knows that Russia and Iran back Syria and they're major players, right? Given they know that Russia won the war in Syria, given that they know the domestic political situation is incredibly volatile, this is the very reason why they behave in incredibly risk-averse ways, because they know that they are in a tenuous position, which is why they haven't escalated and have no incentive to, right? We think on their side of the house, though, simultaneously, the arguments we hear in PMC about how Israel has a really strong military history are reasons you should be incredibly skeptical that Israel will just throw their hands up and walk away, which is to say that when Israel actually perceives there is a credible existential threat to them, they tend to ramp up, they don't just lie down and take it, right? If you buy their arguments about how Trump is actually really pro-Russia, this is another reason why Israel will ramp up their efforts even further, actually maybe really seriously consider a nuclear option because they don't have that safety blanket perhaps from other states backing them up in the past, which is why on their side of the house they do actually create a really possible situation where the escalation that happens is a long-term conflict, which is way worse than these short spouts of violence that happen in the status quo, which we tell you will go away in the long run. Second of all, I want to talk about what actually happens and why we don't think there's going to be any follow-through, which is the most likely scenario. We don't get any response to Sandy's argumentation about why, given Russia's political uncertainty right now, there's no reason why Putin would actually escalate, even if he says he will. On their side of the house, all that happens is you commit yourself to a red line, which in the long run hurts your credibility if you don't actually follow through. Reasons why Putin won't actually follow through. We already told you that Putin had the worst election result of his life when oil prices dipped, which necessarily shows that the Russian people do actually respond to external economic indicators insofar as they realize that purchasing power has decreased, but they don't get the same sort of perceptual direct benefits to their individual lives from a war raging in another part of the world they've never been to, right?
One of Putin's best election results came immediately after he decided to annex Ukraine.
Yeah, so that is the reason why perhaps Russia should focus on other conflicts where they can very easily win. This isn't a reason to focus on Israel's risks, right? This is literally the overview about how Putin wants to get perceptual dominance. He can poke others, like he can put his hands in different cookie jars, not the Syrian cookie jar. Great. So second of all, I think I want to talk about why we think you should compound this argument with what has been happening in the status quo, which is that election victory margins have gotten increasingly narrower for Putin and his cohorts, necessarily because there's an increased penetration of media into the Russian state, which is why even if you buy there's a short-term boost to Putin's popularity that isn't sustainable in the long run. Furthermore, I want to note that it's the fact that, so I also want to note that the power transition in Russia is still some time away. So the temporary boost to Putin's popularity of saying that he's the big cheese in town isn't actually going to endure if the outcomes don't manifest. We think that the outcome therefore controls the internal link, but more importantly, if you actually care about perception, there's just other no-risk ways to do this. If Putin is actually averse to do this in no-risk ways. Finally, I want to talk about what actually happens when there is follow-through. So in terms of how the U.S. is so maybe it's to say the U.S. is already sanctioning Russia, and Trump also supports Russia. This doesn't engage with the heart of Sandy's argumentation, which is that, yes, perhaps Trump is okay, for example, not actively aggressing against Russia or cooperating when the situation arises, but this isn't a reason why Trump is going to pivot against decades of established Republican and U.S. foreign policy just to appease one guy, right? Second of all, we told you that Trump, above all, is still a self-interested person who cares about being reelected. If this is true, he actively wants to In terms of emboldening Israel's right, we gave you arguments about why they actually do this largely for perceptual reasons. On their side of the house, when you actually make it seem like Israel's existence is under threat, that is that Russia is actively trying to harm Israel, we think it is more likely that we get a default to the support for Israel's, for the really highly conservative hawkish aspects of Israel's political spectrum, necessarily because people in Israel care a lot about feeling secure, even if they don't care, and like they're going to try to organize that above maybe the harms of corruption, which I think are actually bad in terms of is re-establishing an Israel that is really militant in the long run, which does actually have long-term consequences. Finally, I think in terms of the risks of escalation, we think, look, if you actually care about stability in the region, there's no reason why having another war is actually going to solve this threat. Yes, maybe Russia won the first conflict. That is a very different sort of war than the type of war that they're threatening to enter, which is to say that the reason why Russia won is because of waffling and uncertainty and a lack of commitment on the other side on this, in terms of this conflict that isn't actually what's happening here, which is why there is going to be a challenge to Russian dominance, which is why it's not a certain outcome. All these reasons are actually
All right, I think this is the most recommended.
So, open opposition gave about 16,000 arguments as to why this is potentially a bad idea. The issue with that is that it's entirely contingent on everyone in this room conceding that this is an empty, meaningless threat, but that at most could be construed as a negative thing to say to people in the region that you want support from. I think the issue with that is that I think that this is probably an incredibly credible threat for a whole host of reasons that the British government did not tell you in this debate, that at that point, that insofar as this is a credible threat, and as much as we can show that one, this maybe makes Israel do this a lot less, which is good for you, but two, even if the worst case scenario happens, this is actually probably still a win for the Russian state. So, why is this an effective tool? Let's understand that your primary interest in this region is not the increase of trade with Syria or Iran. It's not your primary interest. There can be secondary interest, there can be things you care about, but the primary thing you care about is to resist the spread of Western influence within the region as a means of getting a foothold throughout the rest of the world, as a means of counteracting Western narratives, as a means of propping yourself up. What this means is that you are willing to take some sorts of military losses here and there, and as much as you can be able to do this, protracted conflicts are not something that you are particularly afraid of as a consequence, because protracted conflicts show to your domestic population that you are a credible threat to the United States of America, which is key to supporting your own self. So, when opening opposition says that this is not going to be an effective tool for whatever reasons, but it's contingent on that, notice that their whole analysis about like Turkey's response, the US's response, etc., is resting on actors assuming that this is a credible threat. But notice, I think they're correct in that assumption, because outside of the countless times that Russia has turned off the gas to all of Europe when the countries have not met the demands of the Russian state, and the many times they have invaded countries within Eastern Europe, or annexed parts of countries, or put on sanctions, or any sort of military undermining that they have done of states, it is often been when demands that Russia has set out, or guidelines that they have expected in the region, have not been followed through on. In many circumstances, even if it is not as extreme of a response, although arguably it is equally as extreme of a response in many circumstances, the Russian state has met its outcomes. But notably, this is more than just inside the Eastern European context, right? Like, Russia very much funds the Venezuelan state, especially with the Rose regime, among other outside projects that it does very far away from Russia. It has met those obligations, and there is not, and because Russia cares very deeply about building trust with countries that it chooses to align itself with, because that's a primary means by which it gets power. So, what I think is much more likely, to happen on their side of this debate is, I just don't think that this is going to be something that the United States responds to in the event that there's any sort of conflict in any meaningful way. Why? I mean, it's because the United States has been using proxy forces in the Middle East for an incredibly long time, because it hasn't been wanting to commit military resources to this region, because it is very politically untenable right now to be able to do this. We know this for a number of reasons. One, I mean, the United States for the last 6 months has been trying to start a war in Iran for whatever fucking reason it possibly can, and each and every time the American public has shot this down. Because one, even though the interests of the Middle East have been framed as being in the interests of the American public, this has been something that the public has been not receptive to, because they do not believe this to be within their own interests. Two, it is because they still remember the multiple losses the U.S. military has taken in the region. I don't think it is a sacrifice that people are willing to make. But I think this is much more important, right? I think that the main reason why the U.S. is just not likely to want to do this is because I just think that it is not going to be the case that the U.S. is interested in fighting a protracted war that is going to irreparably damage the infrastructure of one of its closest allies, which is its foothold into the region. It doesn't want to fight that conflict because it hurts U.S. hegemony to be able to do this. So, I think instead, in a second, what I think instead is much more likely to happen is Israel is likely to stop doing this in a barrage of circumstances. The first is because I just don't think it is the case that they are able to rely on the United States backing them, because I think that in many circumstances they might lose funding in some circumstances, as well as Israel has a whole host of other conflicts that it is sending proxies to and involving itself in, that it is probably not going to want to commit resources towards this particular conflict. Two, it is because I think it emboldens other enemies of Israel to start attacking Israel even stronger in the circumstance where a major power starts suggesting that they are going to do the same, right? Iran has been regularly funding groups who attempt to undermine Israeli power and who are trying to attack the Israeli state. I think that in those circumstances, those forces get significantly emboldened in as much as they have support from a major nation to be able to do that. Before I get to the show.
Gains popularity from gaining. Why is it a good idea to risk a protracted conflict that Lane tells you can't win, either because of Russia's own limitations, or
Yeah, because the U.S. got so much of those stuff in the Middle East.
Like, I mean, I just don't think that it is entirely contingent on winning when you get benefits. In many circumstances, Putin gets benefit merely by being recognized as an other who is a credible force. That was much too much of an existentialism in philosophy term. But realistically, it is through the recognition of power in those circumstances where you get these wins, not so much of the actual military victory. So, the other reason why I think Israel is probably going to have to back out of this is because these forces just are not as important to Israel as to its other threats. Why? Because this is a actual threat, right? That is to say, this is a threat that is credible and is immediate. The threats of Hezbollah in Syria are not immediate threats in the sense that they are not attacking you in this moment. That means that weighing them off between potential harms of Hezbollah attacking you and the very real immediate harm of being attacked by Russia in this circumstance we continue to do this means that the calculus of Israel is one which they are much more likely to not do this. And Russia is probably going to be willing to do this because it continues to offer to its own allies the amount of support that Russia is willing to give. But let's say we're entirely wrong, and we can see what I just said in the POI, that the U.S. is going to intervene, and this is a conflict that in many circumstances will go wrong because of all your allies intervening. This still emboldens Russia's power because it undermines NATO and the European Union in Eastern Europe, because when Russia is regularly trying to fight in this region and say, look, they don't give a fuck about your interests, they are not here to support you, and then the U.S. goes in and militarily intervenes in the Middle East because you get a few proportionate missile shots. I think what that signals is that it actually was never the case that they cared about the trading agreements with you, but it was instead that your country was never relevant to their own conception of power and the way in which the U.S. would get more hegemony. I think in that circumstance, it becomes a lot more beneficial for the Russian states that this kind of conflict happens, because they're able to signal to their own region and get power towards Europe that those negotiations are something that we're never going to be able to benefit them. Ultimately, I think that this also benefits Russia domestically because it means that they're seen as a credible threat. We're very proud of this.
here.
All right, I thank the speaker for those remarks, and I invite the member of opposition.
it's not clear whether Iran or Saudi Arabia will emerge triumphant in their conflict. In a state in which Russia's main economic trading partners like China and Syria are either war-torn or turning toward Asia, it's incredibly important for Russia to maintain a balance of powers and interests with all countries in the Middle East, not take firm sides and seem as though it's willing to fight and die for Assad's regime, willing to fight and die for Iran. This not only jeopardizes Russia's prestige and status with its allies, that is Syria and Iran, it makes Syria and Iran complacent with regard to their relationship with Russia, but it also jeopardizes Russia's ability to co-opt massive economic benefits in the Middle East and Europe going forward. But before that, let's deal with some rebuttal from the extension. The first thing they talk about is about the importance of maintaining trust with allies and being seen as trustworthy for Assad's government. First thing, I think Russia does not suffer from a deficit of trust with Assad's government. They've literally helped Assad win the war. Assad's not expecting Russia to do more to show its loyalty. In fact, the risk right now is that Assad takes Russia for granted because Russia has sacrificed so much of its military troops. If now it's willing to it's seen as sacrificing even more, literally willing to go to the ends of the earth to defend Assad's regime from internal instability, it will be seen as, well, to put it informally, Assad's bitch, right? And that's not good for Russia's standing with Assad in terms of extracting leverage from Assad in post-conflict Syria. It's also not good for Russia in terms of extracting leverage over Iran, because now it's seen as it's willing to sacrifice anything for Iran. Iran thinks that Russia needs Iran more than Iran needs Russia, and that's not a good position for negotiation and diplomacy. The second thing they talk about is why the US will never attack Russia or retaliate, right? First thing I want to point out is that it's very likely that it will. The moderates right now might be, kind of tepid about military action, but the point at which Russia is literally posing an existential threat to bomb Israel, the Jewish lobby in the US might be more willing to do that. But second of all, I want to point out that the US does not actually need to militarily retaliate against Russia for it to severely compromise Russia's strategic interests. The US does not need military intervention in terms of ground troops. They can have airstrikes, as is very successful in Libya, that might severely damage Russia's military. They can impose economic sanctions on Russian oil, or sanctions on other sales to Russia that would cripple Russia's economy. Europe as well is another major threat of retaliation, right? These are reasons I think are distinct from OG and why Europe is particularly likely to retaliate, because Europe is extremely anti-Assad, right? They see the coalition as having failed, and they don't want Assad to gain more power in a post-conflict Syria. They're also very anti countries having arbitrary declarations of war, and Russia making such a threat against Israel is a threat to the international order that Europe has premised itself upon, and that is that countries can arbitrarily invade other countries. That's why Europe will be very willing to impose sanctions on Russia. This is a bad thing because Russia is already moving closer to Europe. What Russia needs right now is to gain Europe's support, and as Europe slowly lifts sanctions that were imposed after Russia invades Crimea, the worst thing to do right now is turn the tide against Europe, and turn the tide against Europe in willing to make sanctions on Russia, which will cut off Russia's main source of oil export and main source of economic growth. So what this shows is that even if you think that government has shown that Russia might be in a position right now to attack Israel, as time goes on and all these retaliations pile up with Russia, it will not be able to engage in a sustained effort or sustained defense of Syria or a sustained attack on Israel. And when that happens, Russia's original threat just simply looks weak. Let's talk about our extension. The first thing we want to talk about is the relationship between Syria, Iran, and Russia. Because while we think our opening opposition has talked about why Syria won't like this, I think it's more important to talk about how this causes Russia to lose important leverage and important power over its bargaining position with regard to Syria and Iran. Recognize that the alliance with Russia with Syria and Iran is important, but it's a big gamble to be seen as willing to give up everything and anything to defend Syria and Iran at all costs. Because at this point, now Syria and Iran think that Russia is more desperate for instance, markets or for their strategic interests in the Middle East than they need Russia. At this point, Russia will be unwilling to extract concessions and leverage from Iran and Syria that are crucial. What are these concessions? First of all, in the post-conflict state of Syria, Russia wants to have a central role in rebuilding it and a central position in the clientele state. This looks like things like securing state contracts for infrastructure that will need to be rebuilt. This looks like securing things such as having a good price of oil sales to Syria, something that they will need a lot of as they try to rebuild the manufacturing economy. Second of all, with regards to Iran, they want to extract economic concessions such as the price of oil to be sold to Iran, especially since oil exports in the world in general are being threatened, and Russia now is the most reliable source of oil exports to these countries. If Russia is seen as weak and Russia is seen as desperate, Syria and Iranian leaders to Russia, therefore jeopardizing their ability to extract more leverage. Before I move on, yes.
Russia already took the side, essentially looked weak and showed their hand when they spent billions and lost dozens of planes to single-handedly win the war for Assad.
Winning the war for Assad can at least be seen as a strategic victory for Russia because it's important for Russia to maintain its most important ally in the Middle East. But defending Syria, even after they won the war, defending Syria just so that Assad can have 100% control of the territory, and defending a strange proxy war between Hezbollah and Israel is not seen as Russia's strategic interest. It's seen as Putin having been put into the pockets of Assad and put into the pockets of Iranian leaders. It's seen as Putin having become the bitch of Syria of Iran, and we don't want that. Let's also point out that Putin's expansionism has never been crouched in terms of expansionism in the Middle East. Russia's interest in the Middle East, therefore, should be very limited. They QI'd an OG to 00 after Crimea, Putin's popularity increased. But that's because Crimea has a large Russian-speaking population, and therefore Russia's popularity in terms of military expansion has only ever been because of reviving the old Russian Empire. Syria and Iran are not part of the old Russian Empire, and therefore it's not in Russia's interest to try and thwart them militarily. What do we advocate for instead? We advocate for a much more narrow, economic-focused interest in the Middle East. This is the context of the Middle East. Iran and Saudi's Arabia's war is heating up, and you're not sure who's going to win. You don't want to take sides with Iran, because then you might alienate Saudi Arabia as a important trading partner. What does Russia have to gain from Saudi Arabia in the Middle East? First of all, the volatility of the oil situation in Saudi Arabia means that Russia could become the main oil exporter to many Middle Eastern countries that previously relied on Saudi Arabia. Second, Russia is the main arms exporter to the Middle East, and to gain these kind of deals with Middle Eastern countries, you need to not alienate the whole of Sunni the Middle East by being seen as supporting the biggest Shia bad guy, which is Iran. Why will Russia not be able to do this if it invades? Because it will alienate its possible partners in the Middle East and be seen as entirely within the sphere of influence of Iran. Every country that is anti-Iran will now be averse to forming any kind of economic partnership with Russia. We don't think that this is good for what Russia's main interest in the Middle East should be. We're very proud of this.
Two main themes in the speech. First, talking about what aggressive policy looks like in Russia, and talking about the real interests of Russia, which each team has said is the interest of Russia. By closing government, Ethan has told you why anti-US hegemony should be the main interest of Russia, and why it already is, why cemented this policy. First, let's talk about opening opposition and how their ideas of aggressive policy, how they work within Israel, and also why deterrence might already exist. So, they think that hostility towards Russia is a way to prevent them at all already. This isn't the case because the Middle East already undermines them by having these bombings in the first place. So this cannot inherently work as a deterrent, which is why the policy is needed. But secondly, even if this is about making sure that Hezbollah cannot operate at the border, Russia should still care about their allies because it is the foothold towards them having the ability to have any influential power within the Middle East. Assad being one of their main allies, it is very important to Russian hegemony that they care at all if any attacks are happening. I think it is very reasonable that even if it is the fringe cases of opening opposition that they're only bombing the borders, it's still important that Russia takes a hard stance and a hard interest into this. So, they also say a lot of things about this red line, and all of their impacts actually lie upon the assumption that Russia will never cross this red line. Ethan did some work on refuting this, but I'm going to continue doing this. Because first, they say that there's US allies, and it's very unlikely that Russia is to respond. Closing also says this actually as well. But Ethan explains why America has wanted a war in Iran for ages and has started conflict in many areas like Yemen, but nothing is segmented for two reasons. First, the public's always been able to shut it down, and second, that they have past losses in the region and the American people don't want it. So even if you believe closing opposition where these internal organizations will lobby for these kinds of things, I just don't think it is necessarily the case that the full-scale war in which the US actually directly bombs Russia happens, that would just be the Cold War Part 2. I don't think that is very likely to happen. But even if if America is responding in smaller ways and just funding their allies in the Middle East, this is still a beneficial thing on our side, because Ethan has already talked to you about how if they are undermining Russian credibility, like opening opposition tells you, that if any US response at all increases Russia's rhetoric and ability to talk to Eastern Europe, and how the US didn't even lift a finger when they were under threat. So it is very likely that this emboldens Russia's ability to undermine US hegemony among NATO members, among the EU, so their Western influence falls substantially, and this is still a beneficial thing on our side, right? So, if this red line can be crossed, like we've just proven, then what falls on opening opposition? First, this whole idea of like Netanyahu remaining in power and Israel remaining aggressive, that is not in Russian interest, and it will continue because of the very fact that Russia is able to be aggressive. And second, the region being more hostile to Russia, the Middle East at large, continues and still undermines Russia's interests in the Middle East. So also finally, Russia losing credibility is bad, is what opening opposition says, but we've just proven to you that they are willing to cross this red line, and maybe that is why they will not lose credibility. I'll take you guys later. So, that is why opening opposition has fallen out of this round. Let's talk about this second theme. What is the actual interests of Russia? Opening government tells you that it is to increase trade and Putin gain favor. This is probably true, but Ethan tells you that probably the citizens of Russia, the Russian oligarchs that also retain power that aren't Putin, they both are likely to also care about Russian hegemony and undermining Western powers as much as possible. This is seen by things like funding Venezuela. This is seen by funding different regions of the world so that they can have a foothold to any place where Western influence may exist. So this is probably the biggest interest of Russia that should be weighed within this round. I'll tell you guys later. So, if we put ourselves over opening government there, what does opening opposition say the interests are? They say that they must maintain strong credibility and must not look like bitches in front of the world, right? I've already deconstructed that. But then what does closing opposition tell you? Closing opposition tells you that Russia should not be taking a firm side, and how having centrist beliefs within the Middle East are probably going to help them in the long run. So first response to that, this policy wouldn't last forever, right? Like, this is something that they're going to do in their immediate interest because it is in their immediate interest until things stabilize or whatever. But I'm sorry, if we already have if we've already helped the Assad government and the Assad regime, and there's a partner in that area, I just think that trying to ally with other countries within that area destabilizes your claim to become a huge partner in the Middle East. I will take over.
Russia has organized negotiations like the Astana process, which is a good way to fight American hegemony. But we told you that's harder when you alienate Assad, Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, everyone else with all of our arguments about trade, alliances, and credibility.
I just think, though, because Assad is still your foothold towards that region, you are not doing much in undermining your relationship with them. I don't see why this POI is trying to accomplish. So, also, the interest of Russian hegemony, this is still a response to closing opposition, the interest to Russian hegemony requires you to take strong sides. It is weird that closing opposition says that you should be able to branch out within this region, because the ability to have any hegemonic power within a region comes with a strong ally. Why is this the case? Because if you are the only ally of Assad, or maybe strongest because you're helping their war efforts, then they probably believe you as a truth teller to them and them only. This ability to trust in those governments is the ways in which you have at least one strong partner in the region, and that is the way in which you are able to spread your rhetoric and influence within those regions as well. This also, though, is not like Russia being Iran's bitch, right? Because this is a very reciprocal interaction, because you get the foothold in the region, you are taking maybe a short-term political interest loss so that you are able to supplement your hegemonic powers within that region at all. You're not becoming Iran's bitch, so that's the wrong closing opposition. But also, recognize that Putin probably needs to look powerful. The ways in which he's able to do that is being decisive, not being a very centrist stance like closing the opposition says you should. This comes with decisiveness. You should be taking strong sides. strong sides in this effort, and I just do not believe that Ethan's arguments about like why the response, even if it exists from America, it affects the ways in which the Eastern Europe will respond, and also like why the U.S. would not be willing to respond at all has really been refuted. I think that in either case, if or if not Russia has to respond and cross this red line, we have seen any ways in which Russia is still able to control hegemonic power, which is very much in their interests. This is something that Russia should certainly threaten, and why it is a credible threat. So happy to.
I thank the speaker for those remarks, and I'm going to be off with.
The reason we place over OO is because we deal explicitly and extensively with their best case scenario, which is to say this works and Israel stops. A number of reasons why in their best case scenario, Russia is still worse off. First idea here is the idea of leverage, and we don't want Russia to be seen as weak. The response we hear is that Russia should care about its allies because it is good for Russia for its allies to have power. The problem with this response, which we heard over and over again from the previous speech, is that it is not narrowly tailored. That is to say, it gives a very broad idea. You have an ally, you want your ally to be powerful because that is good for you, but it fails to identify why the particular power that they create is good for Russia. That is to say, they fail to give a detailed mechanistic explanation of why Hezbollah and Iranian troops having less threats in very specific parts of Syria is something that leads to any particular good outcomes for Russia. So when they make analogies like, Russia funds Venezuela because this is in Russia's interest, this is completely disanalogous because Venezuela is the only favorable ally to Russia in the entirety of South America. But the counterfactual is you have states like Iran and Syria, which without this are already going to be favorable to you because they are basically alienated by all of the rest of the world. But what they say in this response to this basically is that in order to have power, you are required to take a strong side. The problem with taking a particularly strong side and a strong position beyond the point where it is perceived as geopolitically necessary is that it alienates Sunni states in the region, which are Sunni states with which you could foster a stronger development. So, I think that it is feasible to say that the states with which you already have a good relationship, you don't gain anything extra, but states in which you could, in the future, for instance, get a more preferential trade deal, gun deals, and so on, you alienate these states to a more significant degree. But the next response they give is, well, maybe the relationship with Iran and Syria isn't that strong. Iran and Syria need a reason to trust in Russia. But we think that there are maybe very palpable reasons why you do lose some degree of leverage. That is to say, to some degree, when you want a state to be clientelistic to you and to be within your sphere of influence, it is not always in your interest for that state to be unilaterally stronger. That is to say, when you have, when these states, for instance, face more retaliation for Israel, you might be able to say something like this. You, because you are more militarily threatened, might want more of our troops in your country. You might want more airplanes within the region. Maybe you will want more funding for us, so we'll give you more money. But in exchange, we will extract certain advantages, certain benefits. The practicalities of how clientelistic relationships play out in the region make it such that strengthening your clienteling states isn't always in your interest. This is a very particular dynamic that both benches on the opposition team have failed to understand. Yeah.
The war was over, but Israel's re-escalation is killing Iranian and Russian troops and ravaging Syrian infrastructure. Iranians, Syrians, and Russians alike all love the Kremlin standing up to Israeli
Okay,
destruction.
I have 30 seconds at the end about why OG is out of the ground. I'll do it here. Israeli strikes are not about continuing the proxy war in a way that systematically debilitates Syria. The reason for this is because Israel is not dumb. If OG can tell us that the war is over, Israel can tell. So think about, for instance, think about what you're saying. What incentives does Israel have to bomb major infrastructure targets in Syria such that they will be more alienated by an up-and-coming power right next to its border? Think of what they tell us in the model, which is we'll have reciprocal attacks on military targets in Israel. If what you're saying is true, and they're doing more than just attacking strategic military bases for Iran and Hezbollah in Syria, then what you would be doing under your model is threatening to bomb bridges outside of Tel Aviv. And I'm sorry, but your arguments have not incorporated for the consequences of that. Because if you bomb the outskirts of Tel Aviv, you are facing all-out war against Israel and quite possibly its biggest ally, the United States. So the very characterization of reciprocality that you characterize in your model concedes that this is not what Israel is doing in Syria. That is the crux of your case. You're out. Okay. The last thing that they tell us from closing is there is generally a reason for Russia to do these things because generally Russia cares about undermining the West. Yeah, this might sound like something that is generally true, but Russia needs to make specific strategies and prioritize specific areas in which, in fact, it undermines the West. For instance, I don't really think that Russia funds the Socialist Party of Luxembourg, even though this might be in their interest because they are anti-American or whatever. The reason for this is because the Socialist Party in Luxembourg isn't going to make any difference to the balance of power in Europe in a way that is favorable to Russia. Similarly, because the particular conflict that Hezbollah is tied into is a conflict that has roots that are not geopolitically strategic and that don't give Russia any economic benefits because they already have access to the trading routes next to Syria. It is unclear that strengthening these particular routes leads to any benefit to Russia vis-a-vis the West. So it is unclear that this is a particular type of decrease in Western power that Russia actually cares about. That is the problem with most of the opposition. They aren't narrowly tailored to the particularities of this conflict. All this stuff, when we win under the best case scenario. But I want to say one more thing, which is, a lot of this debate has been about, what do we get? The best case scenario where Israel doesn't bomb, or the worst case scenario where Israel keeps on bombing? But I think what most openly missed is a simple risk calculus. We don't know which is going to happen, but given the probabilities that some happen, what do we think is a preferable outcome? And I think everything I've said so far about the best case scenario being not that good, even if it's net positive, the substantial risk that comes from the worst case scenario makes it such that even if you consider this mitigation, but it's still good, it still ought to win the debate. This is for a few reasons. Firstly, because the worst case scenario is really bad for Russia. They say there won't be a full-scale war. No, but you can bomb substantial targets. It's still really bad for Russia. They say any US response strengthens Russia. No, because the Middle East isn't seen as a traditional Russian homeland, so there is no patriotic sense that could inspire a support for Putin in the way that happened in Ukraine. Also, you need money from oil and trade. The Russian economy is under threat of being devastated, and if Europe and the US stop trading with you, this has palpable effects on the well-being of the Russian people that affect their political support for Putin. Lastly, I think all of the reasons Colin gives you about how there are particular responses that can be done to the Russian threat characterizes as saying the worst case scenario is actually very likely because both the opposition benches have failed to account for this risk in their case. They are out of this job. Thank you.